Please be seated. Good morning. Hereby, I open this academic ceremony in which Yabo Wu will defend the academic thesis, Shaping the Firm as a Development Actor, the case of Chinese businesses in Kenya. May I invite you to please present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
Thank you. Well, dear Director, dear committee members, dear supervisors, dear friends and colleagues, I would like to present my doctoral project, which is entitled Shaping the Firm as a Development Actor. In this research, I take Chinese businesses in Kenya as a case to study the complex dynamics in co-constructing Chinese development cooperation. Well, when I initiated this project, I was frequently facing some questions such as, does the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, buy African countries or African people through infrastructure construction or other cooperation activities? Does the CCP do this through its controlled business entities? Well, this notion of the state's utilization of firms to implement economic cooperation is aligned with academic discussions of Chinese capitalism, some of which argues that Chinese businesses operate under state control to fulfill strategic objectives. Contrastingly, research has revealed that the commercial orientation of Chinese firms can conflict with the state's political objectives. Due to the two contrasting views, this research is inspired to probe the practical dynamics between and around the Chinese state and firms in Chinese development cooperation. The investigation geographically focuses on Kenya, an African country that holds a variety of Chinese business activities. My co-research questions are, first, how does the Chinese state involve and interact with Chinese firms in development cooperation? Second, how do firms, including both state-owned enterprises, which I will refer to as SOEs in the following, and private firms passively and actively respond to state influence? Third, how do the dynamics between the Chinese state and firms unfold within the context that involves Kenya state and non-state actors? And what insights does this provide about Chinese economic engagement? I approached this complex questions through three research themes, which involves slightly different actors. Namely, first, it's between state and firm interactions in the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. The second, the mutual accommodation between Chinese actors and the Kenya politics of infrastructure development. And the third, the social engagement through public diplomacy. This study makes an empirical contribution to research on Chinese African engagement by focusing on Kenya. Economically speaking, Kenya is not a resource-dependent African country like the DRC or Angola, which have been intensively researched in Africa-China literature. Secondly, Kenya is recognized among the more advanced African economies, which attracts a diversity of Chinese business activities. So this opens space for investigating the complexity of Chinese economic engagement involving various kinds of firms. The single case study approach to studying Chinese business in Kenya allows for an acute understanding of the contextual variability of the relational dynamics involving Chinese state agencies, Chinese firms, and various contextual Kenya actors in constructing development cooperation. Data came from fieldwork conducted for 4 months in Nairobi. Yet, due to the nature of the research topic and my positionality, most informants are Chinese business people. The first research theme is around the relational dynamics between the Chinese state and different Chinese firms in state-initiated BRI, which has received much attention in the area of development cooperation. This theme speaks to debates between scholars who emphasize a state-led approach and those who see decentralized project operations initiated by profit motives in the BRI. Well, for this theme, I conduct cross-sectoral analysis of 6 BRI projects initiated by either SOEs or private firms in the infrastructure, trade, and manufacturing sectors. This investigation first bridges the gap concerning the state-led feature of the BRI and the decentralized autonomous BRI implementations. I conceptualize that the state shaping of business can be seen as actions to select and collapse the business endeavors of state-owned and private firms into the orbit of the state's discourse of win-win in the BRI. This selective support and guidance approach leaves room for decentralized and commercial-oriented operations initiated by the SOEs and private firms, which are more frontier to align with the host economy in Kenya. Second, this investigation contributes to the empirical findings on BRI projects across sectors and ownership types. Most studies on China's BRI projects concentrate on the infrastructure sector with SOE constructed projects. Well, in this research, I find similarities between private firms and SOEs, especially in terms of acquiring support from the state. They both have access to certain financial and operational assistance due to their own needs. The second research theme is around mutual accommodation between Chinese actors and the Kenya executive government. This exploration draws on the discussion of African agency in China-Africa relations, which argues African actors, such as political elites or civil society, create constraints on Chinese engagement. The discussions of African agency challenge the conventional view of China's dominance and African countries' subordination in its bilateral relations with China. Built on these insights, I explore how the relational dynamics among the Chinese state, Chinese firms, and the infrastructure politics crafted by the host executive government of Kenya collectively shape Chinese involvement in Kenya's infrastructure development. To answer the raised research question, I explore a case on Chinese infrastructure involvement in Kenya's construction of Konza Technopolis, which is a flagship project in Kenya Vision 2030 to build a futuristic technology city. Well, in this investigation, I manifest the Kenya government's agency to use Chinese actors among international resources for infrastructure development, override constraints for Chinese projects, and employ the debt finance approach to initiate infrastructure development. This manifestation dispels the notion of pervasive incapacity or failure of African countries in dealing with external actors. Subsequently, the diverse adaptations of Chinese firms and state agencies unpack the multidimensional engagements of Chinese actors in Africa's infrastructure development. Chinese firms enhance relations with Kenya political actors because they recognize that the Kenya government balances international engagements and initiates competitive tendering processes, smooth project operations through individual intervenes. The Chinese state's shaping of businesses is contingent on Kenya politics as well. It firstly reflects on that the debt-financed Konza construction provides the environment for the Chinese state to use its financial incentive. Furthermore, state agencies reproduce the social importance of projects endorsed by the Kenya political actors in media and government documents to cultivate its BRI diplomacy. The third research theme examines the power mechanism of the Chinese state to construct the social acceptance of Kenya people and the participation of Chinese firms in this mechanism. Studies on Chinese public diplomacy have constructed the view of unidirectional state's dominance and leading in diplomatic agendas. Chinese firms have been seen to be among state agents that the state can leverage to serve national objectives. I aim to challenge this view. For investigating this theme, I examined in depth the cases of a state-owned construction company and a private manufacturing company. Well, firstly, this investigation elucidates the Chinese state's reflexive approach to using both SOEs and certain selected private firms. The state involves firms by advocating, mobilizing, and publicizing corporate social responsibility, CSR, through the media, thus shaping them as aligned with the state's win-win commitment. Secondly, this investigation details the multi-directional involvement of the state and firms in promoting CSR to demonstrate their contested stances. Especially, Chinese firms are situated in the transnational context to initiatively implement CSR in response to the confluence of social forces from the context, also some international forces to discipline them. And they negotiate their cooperation with the state. Well, in other words, aligning with the firm's own interests makes it possible for CSR to serve as a tool for the state to guide and steer firms. Thirdly, I specified the division of labor between firms and the state in influencing Kenyans due to their contested stances and varied interests. The motivation to cultivate good relations with local communities prompts firms to devote more to community-based publicity of CSR, while leaving the engagement with Kenyan national audiences to the Chinese embassy, which has more public relations resources. Finally, in general, this thesis makes three conclusions. First, it contests the assumption of the Chinese state merely as a top-down, unidirectional steering and control actor in relation to Chinese business actors. This thesis emphasized the Chinese state is dynamic and malleable to constraints and opportunities presented by the Kenya context as well as Chinese business operations. This malleability of state indicates Chinese state agencies' co-involvement and co-shaping development cooperation with Chinese firms and Kenyan stakeholders. Second, this thesis provides nuance on the non-submissive role of both state-owned and private firms in state-initiated development cooperation. I emphasize firms' contested collaboration with the Chinese state to construct Chinese development cooperation. The contested nature is due to the potential conflicts between Chinese firms' commercial orientation as well as their situation in transnational networks. That means they are influenced by international market forces, contextual politics, and social forces, and so on. And of course, the Chinese state's political objectives. The collaboration indicates the alignment of interests, negotiations, compromises, and the division of labor through the dynamic, interactive processes. The third theoretical contribution lies in unpacking China's dynamic process of constructing the political narrative of development cooperation in Kenya to bridge the two unitary views, either perceiving China as a neo-colonial power or a pure development partner. Firms' co-construction of development cooperation with the Chinese state and Kenyan stakeholders reflects firms' great efforts to contrast the narrative of Chinese exploitative practices and, to a certain level, promote business operations to involve development cooperation elements such as creating more jobs as well. So that's all of my presentation. Now I will turn the word back to the proactor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. The opposition will now be opened by Professor Parek Kamodi, Professor in Geography, University of Dublin, Trinity College.
Thank you very much, Chair, and congratulations, Yabo, on the thesis. I'd like to ask you, in the thesis, you say that the Belt and Road Initiative has an increasingly solid reputation, but a lot of the literature suggests there's been quite a lot of pushback, blowback, that there are contradictions attached to the BRI. So I'd like to hear your thoughts and insights as to why you feel it has an increasingly solid reputation. Thank you.
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent. Thank you for a kind word and this very interesting question. Well, I think in this thesis, I don't have the liberty to really say the BRI reputation has been enhanced. Otherwise, I think in this thesis, I just want to argue that the Chinese government as well as Chinese firms are try their very best to construct the win-win commitment to increase the reputation of BRI. Well, of course, there are some backlashes to the BRI due to different interest groups, social groups infected by different kinds of BRI projects. Well, that kind of indicates that this could be involving and developing subject that needs to further research. And yes, the increasing interactions between the political narrative of BRI and as well as different voices concerning BRI is very interesting to investigate. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Are you fine with the answer?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
Okay,
perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Valentina Mazzucato, Professor of Globalization and Development at our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, Maastricht University.
So, dear candidate, let me start first by complimenting you on a well-written thesis. And I particularly liked your fieldwork approach, which you took to investigating the way that the Chinese state and Chinese firms engage with each other in an African context, in this case, Kenya. You show that there are mutual and interdependent influences between Chinese corporate actors and the Chinese state-led development corporation, breaking down some of the dichotomous views that were inherent in the early literatures on China and Africa. And you also argue that the mutual influences are shaped by the African context, and in particular, what you call African agency. And we heard a little bit about it in your presentation. So this is exactly where my question is. It's about this concept that you use of African agency. And I would like to ask you if you could please explain how you conceptualize this concept. How can you determine, or how did you determine, that it is indeed African agency and not broader structural factors at play? And lastly, but relatedly, who is the African in African agency? Namely, how did you incorporate these different African actors in your study? So it's a three-part question.
Okay. Well, dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and the three interesting questions. Well, firstly, how I conceptualize the African agency. Well, I need to emphasize that the whole agency concept need to be put in the agency structure approach. That is to see that African agency always manifests in the context that involves a lot of social structures, like the international norms or very contextual constraints, and also the already established cultural and social norms and orders. So to conceptualize this, I think African agency I'm talking about is kind of very critical perspective to see that China-Africa relations is not dominated by China itself, but it's kind of involves a lot of different actors, especially those African actors, they create very strong constraints on Chinese economic engagement. They get involved with Chinese actors in a dynamic, interactive processes, so they kind of co-involve together. Well, for how to define agency, not other broader factors, well, I think what I want to emphasize in this thesis would be those specific constraints that created by actors, for example, political elites. They want Chinese actors to enter like a competitive tendering processes. This process not necessarily involves a lot of international actors, but they could create a tendering process specifically targeted to different Chinese firms, and they want different Chinese firms to participate in this process. That kind of constraints, I can say, well, that's very obvious African agency expressed, not other factors. But also, this African agency sometimes is very complicated to distinguish from other factors. Yes, that's why it needs to be very specific in this thesis. Another example could be, well, civil society has really strong slogan or strong like social campaigns against Chinese activities or Chinese firms. They request very clearly about what they want from the firms, and that also create constraints for Chinese business operations. And that's also the African agency that I would look at in the thesis. And who is the Africans? Well, that's kind of very, like in literature, that's very broadly. There's also like business partners, community actors, community leaders, or even just like those people affected by Chinese business operations. But in my research, I think that's mostly concentrate on the mutual accommodation chapter, that I concentrate on mostly Kenya executive government, because from my knowledge, they are very powerful actor to really shape the business operations of Chinese firms. And also, they deliberately leave some room for Chinese actors to maneuver, to explore. So that's like a very strong African actors has the agency. But also in the chapter about public diplomacy, I also revealed that a lot of communities have this strong sense to constrain or to shape foreign business actors in their from their own perspective. So that's also African actors that I looked at to have strong agencies to say, well, you need to communicate, for Chinese firms, you need to communicate better with our communities. So that's why a lot of Chinese firms contribute to community-based publicity of CSR. So I hope you will satisfy with my brief answers to those three questions.
Can you follow up?
Yes, please.
Okay, I thank you for your answers, I think, to the three questions. I'm just also wondering, you also said it in your presentation that given your positionality, you mainly ended up speaking with Chinese business people. And so could you explain a little bit about how you then draw your conclusions about African agency? How did you bring these conclusions?
Yes. Thank you for this very interesting question. And I think it's very important for me to clarify, because most of my informats are Chinese nationals. That's due to my cultural and linguistic closeness to them. I think, but as well, from their like kind of subjective discourse or subjective comments about their business operations of Chinese firms, they can also highlight certain points for African agency that they value very much in their daily operations. So that's kind of the moment I can draw what African agency really means for them. So that's kind of my approach to that. But also I need to admit my own limitation to really unpack the complexity in African agency. That involves like a lot of different interest groups influenced or disrupted even by Chinese business operations. So they have formed very different perspective, different views, including different expectations to Chinese firms. So yes, that's my limitation to really get involved with that topic.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Oscar Oettele, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the University of Nairobi. And thank you for coming all the way from Nairobi to be with us today.
Thank you so much. Yabo, congratulations on your presentation and completion of the thesis. This is a follow-up question on Chinese agency, and particularly on the role of Chinese embassy. In your thesis, you highlight the encounters of African agency and Chinese agencies, and you highlight the role the Chinese embassy play, particularly on public relations. You mentioned about availability of resources, and then I'm wondering how that public diplomacy in the context of your study, having gotten time to interact with Kenyan, how that public diplomacy is effective. And I'm asking that in the light of Afrobarometer survey data, which in the recent years has indicated decline of favorable views of African, particularly on the role of China in Kenya.
Yes. Well, thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for your kind word and this question. This is very interesting because what I see is Chinese embassy puts a lot of efforts to try to influence Kenyans, especially through this media conferences organized by the embassy, also as well as a lot of other activities. They also organize like donations to improve the reputation of Chinese business actors and the China's national image as a whole. But to a large degree, I don't think this kind of activity is very effective, because that's kind of like a common problem also identified by a lot of staff, not a lot, I only met a few, staff working in the embassy, that they know this kind of activities is necessary due to the political agenda, as well as to increase acceptance. But in otherwise, they also feel a little bit disconnected with a lot of Kenyan audiences through this national media, like the Star or the other mainstream media's platforms. But that's kind of they can only think of at this moment. So that also speaks to that declination of the positive expectations for Chinese actors in Kenya or in African countries. I think with the evolving, deepened economic ties, people discover that there's multi dimensions of Chinese engagement, and people forms more sophisticated, more complex views about Chinese operations. And this public relations, they are very resourceful. They have a lot of resources in the at one hand, but on the other, they don't have like new development tools. So that's not really kind of effective. But that's kind of personal perspective. They still follow this very traditional way to influence Kenyans. They even start to try to use social media platforms like the X, not Twitter, yes, X, to influence a lot of Kenyans and try to have discourses with different social groups. But that's still very evolving, and it's in the very initial stage. Yes, that's my answer to the question.
Would you like to follow up?
Yes, yes. So when you say it's more of an elite undertaking, which fails to elevate the voices of the local communities at the micro levels, because essentially from where I sit, that is what is lacking in all these encounters. What's your position on that?
Well, my position, I don't think I have a position in this topic, but I can reflect a little bit of personal thinking about this question. I think this undertaking approach is not effective. It definitely needs some reforms, even some adjustments. But in the other case, I still see a lot of like growing Chinese people or Chinese small firms more embedded into communities of Kenya. They are more effectively engaged with community residents, and also they have like close daily interactions with communities. They are like probably better publicity resources, and this kind of resources is already start to being discovered by Chinese embassy, and probably through like close interactions or collaborations between the Chinese embassy and those small firms embedded into Kenya urban or village urban communities or villages, they could create different landscape for public diplomacy, or so different ways to influence Kenyan people. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Bilisuma Dito, Associate Professor of Globalization and Development Studies, also at our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear Yabo, congratulations on a well-written thesis. I've enjoyed reading it and learned a lot from it, especially because it nuances the macro dynamics at play when it comes to Chinese engagement in Africa. I really especially appreciated the different actors you looked at in various chapters of your thesis. So in chapter 2, you reviewed the literature on Chinese engagement in Africa, and you rightly show that the dominant discourse in the literature is that Chinese engagement in Africa is either neo-colonial or a win-win cooperation. I would like you to reflect on in what ways the Kenyan case disrupts this discourse, and what kind of unique features does it have, especially when you compare Chinese engagement in other African countries.
Well, to be honest, I think that involves a little bit about my personality. When I really approach Chinese business operations in Kenya, I also encountered those business people not only have businesses in Kenya, but also business in Tanzania and in Ghana even. So for them, it's very interesting because they feel the contexts have a lot of similarities. So that's why their engagement with social actors in the Kenya is quite similar with the strategies they employ to engage with other countries. So for the point of like uniqueness, that's really hard for me to find. I would like to argue that probably in Kenya, the vibrant media environment, the vibrant civil society environment creates those significant features to constrain Chinese activities, because like compared to probably other countries like the DRC or like Rwanda probably, or even Ethiopia, the civil society actors or media actors are not that, like relatively not that obvious for Chinese firms. So in that case, they just operate uniquely to need to respond social pressures and to meet certain social expectations. Well, yes, I think that's like all I can think of right now.
May I follow up? And how about the Kenya case disrupting the discourse in the literature?
Yes, sorry for that. Well, I think the Kenya case is like for disrupting because they, for me, there's like a kind of like a common sense among a lot of Kenyan informats I encountered that the neo-colonial discourse it's a very westernized political discourse. And they are sided with a lot of Chinese actors to say that, well, Chinese economic engagement is like open opportunities for Kenya to have development to stimulate economic growth. But also, this neo-colonial features of like foreign business corporations is like always something they can identify in daily operations, not only in Chinese business operations, but also probably in like South Korean or like those Western companies. So, so for this Kenya case can speak to the to bridge the narratives is that I can see they have like really combined and complex views about China's presence in Africa, in Kenya specifically. They are developed actors to a certain level, not to a whole, and they can have negative effects, and it's their responsibilities like to pursue, to drive the Kenya government or other powerful actors to constrain Chinese activities, to let the Chinese business operations really stimulate the meaningful development for Kenya. Yes.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Elche Fauré, also at FASO, Associate Professor of Globalization and Development.
Thank you, Yabo, for the presentation and the opportunity to read your dissertation. You ask three pertinent and important questions. And you approach each one through a case study that lines up suitably to the question and also comes at it from a unique angle. It's based on empirical fieldwork that I think probably could not have been easy to accomplish. But I thought there were some interesting, intriguing findings that definitely deserve also further follow-up, such as the finding that state-owned enterprises and Chinese firms are, or private firms are not actually always that different in their dynamics. So I congratulate you for some interesting insights in that respect. You mentioned several times in your dissertation that the, as you call it, the capitalist liberal order acts as a constraint on the agency of the Chinese government in Africa. You wrote this dissertation during the Biden presidency. But I would say even since the first Trump presidency, this liberal capitalist order has looked shaky. And of course, it's come crashing down in the last few months. So I'm curious to hear what you think the implications will be for your findings and for China's economic engagement in Africa. Yeah, how you think this will affect the dynamics you highlighted in your dissertation.
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for this question and also your kind word. Well, this also puts me into thinking because people arguing that the capitalist global order is kind of disrupted by the US. However, I see this capitalist global order as kind of sustained by multiple actors. And to a large level, at this moment, China surprisingly becomes a very supportive actor to this capitalist order because obviously the China as a whole country benefits from this order. And I think there's also a lot of different social forces, even in the US or in Europe, still want to support the global neoliberalized markets and the global economic order following by this liberalized market development. So even though the capitalist order is kind of disrupted to a certain level because of the different policy orientations of the Trump administration, or even kind of disrupted in the Biden administration, the regime as an institutional force is already there, and it's evolving, obviously, but it's kind of also very significantly exist. So in that case, China supports it and make it probably gonna live for a longer time, probably. Yeah, so the capitalist global order is always there, and it has like long history to develop to its current manifestation. So yeah, it's gonna, during like uncertain time, it's probably gonna evolve to other directions, but it's there. It's gonna affect it's still like the constraint elements for Chinese business operations in Africa.
If I may have a brief follow-up, then that's definitely addressing the capitalist part of the equation, and I agree with what you've said, but the liberal part as well, the liberal capitalist order, you know, the fact that it seems to move towards state capitalism, towards certain liberal checks and balances being eroded. How does China benefit or not from you know, an era of perhaps state capitalism?
Well, thank you for this question. I think that's kind of something different from what I said, because when I approach state capitalism, I didn't see it as like super contrasting the liberal capitalism, because the state capitalism is actually developed within the regime of liberal capitalism. The state is just merely an actor that has a strong power that try to influence a lot of business actors to use liberal market mechanisms to develop, to expand influence or to expand businesses. So I think to this question, the bottom point of my stance is not to say state is very against or very disrupting force for the liberal market liberalism. So that's kind of like the fundamental contraries we have at this moment. But yes, that's really needs some further discussions probably, and I think that's kind of just, yeah, from my point of view, yes.
I'll leave it there for now.
Very difficult questions. Thank you so much. We now have time for a second round. You've been doing very well, but we have time for a second round, and that will be started by Dr. Oettele.
Okay. Thank you so much once again for the opportunity. Let me make a follow-up question, and this is on the timing, the time frame, the time period of your study. You did this up to 2023.
2021 to 2023.
2021 to 2023.
Yeah, I started the field work by the end of 2021 and then 2022, and then re-entered the field in 2023.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm curious to understand whether you have been following circumstances in Kenya.
Yeah.
There are issues you talk about, taxation, in light of the previous regime, which were favorable. Right now, the tax regime in Kenya is quite evolving, and I guess you've heard about the tax revolt by a group of young people, the Gen Z movement in Kenya. So how do you plan to incorporate these changes in your study? That's the first one, and there's a related question on time. Again, on the Dhaka Action Plan, we are now rightly under the Beijing Action Plan. And I'm just wondering, for the purpose of continuity, whether you're going to tell us what was taken over from the Dhaka Action Plan. Are there similarities with the current action plan as far as these dynamics are concerned? So what are some of the common elements? I thought I should ask this because of the timing of your studies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for this two interesting questions. For this new trends, well, this kind of obviously changed the landscape while Chinese business actors operate. But I mean, that's from my limited knowledge to the current situation, that probably from the perspective of Chinese firms, the situation is changed, obviously, but not changed at all, very changed dramatically. The Kenya government, political elites or business elites are still very powerful alliances for them. They are the social actors. They're gonna continue to enhance close relations with. So for this new trends of taxation, and also as you implied, there are more social movements in Kenya. Well, that's kind of the evolving situation that just involves probably slightly different social forces, but for them, it's still the basic landscape is already there. So I think for my future research, my plan is to definitely to look into the nuances, into the implications about the new trends, but as well, I need to acknowledge that there could be a lot of existing norms, existing orders, or existing social conditions that still influential to Chinese business actors, like the powerful political elites, no matter it's the new generation of administration or the previous one. And for the Dakar action plan and Beijing action plan for comparison, well, unfortunately, I'm not really in the super perfect position to really explain them, to compare them, because I'm not the one that have close look into these two action plans. But I feel like there could be a lot of similarities because they use sometimes very big, vague political narratives to say that they want to establish South-South cooperation, they want to build mutual beneficial business cooperation activities. Well, definitely from different perspectives, involves different actors. They probably have different priorities, involves industries or other sorts. But yeah, it's just very hard for me to compare them. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, it's not. It's not comparing them, but it's just to be cautious of the fact that there could be elements in the action plan you emphasized in the Dhaka plan and the current. So for the purpose of relevance of your thesis, it will be useful to sort of appreciate that the current action plan is running to this, and perhaps these are some of the conceptual similarity in light of the dynamics in the Kenyan context. I think that's the point I'm making.
Yeah, I really appreciate the suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Tito.
Yabo, in chapter 6, you interestingly provide detailed analysis on what shapes Chinese firms' corporate social responsibility practices. And you argue that local actors, the Chinese state, and international CSR practices matter. And I have two questions on that. The first one is, would you say these actors play equal role, or some actors are more dominant than others in influencing these practices, especially because Chinese firms are embedded in global value chains? And the second one is, have you observed from your data whether these CSR practices change over time, and in what ways? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, highly esteemed opponent, for these two questions. Well, firstly, I obviously they don't have equal roles in influencing Chinese actors. Well, from my standpoint, I would argue that probably community forces are more important for Chinese firms because they are more contextual. They put immediate constraints on Chinese business operations. So that's kind of the first thing, especially I'm talking about two firms that have certain level of embeddedness into local communities. So for them, yes, the demands, requests, and sometimes negative impressions from communities are more relevant to their daily operations, especially concerning what kind of CSR they want to give to the communities, like how much money they want to devote, donate. So, but otherwise, international forces is also very significant, especially in the way that a lot of international westernized corporation actors have set examples for Chinese business operations. They have embedded long enough in the Kenya context, and they have developed successful business or CSR strategies that can effectively cope with Kenya community actors. So they kind of forms the disciplines and the shared practices that can be used by Chinese actors. So they are also very important, but not in a very comparable level to community forces. For the changes of practices, well, they are following the big trend, like the overall trend, like to transform from CSR to ESG and to new updations of ESG and whatever. So that kind of things always exist. But for their really changes their practices, well, I'm not very optimistic about that, because I think in the Kenya context, to support underprivileged community members through donations, scholars, or community-based civil infrastructure construction is very important, and already forms the expectations of a lot of community actors. So, in that sense, they don't have a lot of changes. Well, at least that's what I discovered in my fieldwork. So, yes.
Yes. No, I was also thinking about when Chinese firms enter the Kenyan context and then stay there for a long time. Do you observe changes in how they engage with local communities, or how they develop their CSR practices?
Oh, yeah, for that matter, yes, there's very significant involving characteristics, but that's not speaking from one company. That's speaking from from the bigger perspective of involves a lot of Chinese firms, because with the more embedding time, what I find significantly is that there's a growing small entrepreneurs or small Chinese companies want to build deeper relations with Kenya communities. So they kind of have more bondings with local communities. They try to engage more in daily lives of community residents. So that's a growing trend, but it's not very pervasive for a lot of Chinese companies. They still adopt their old strategies to engage with Kenyans, to engage with negative voices, and in a lot of cases, they also try to avoid negative voices. Yes.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Fourie.
Yabo. So a lot of your data relies on interviews that you conduct while in the field. And as we know, interviews are always motivated to position themselves in a certain way and their involvement in certain ways. This isn't problematic per se, of course. We do interviews, we rely on them. But your research questions often sought to get behind this discourse and to look at material relationships and realities on the ground as well. You mentioned awareness of possible bias in your thesis and also the fact that you were dependent on your cooperation with these interviewees to conduct the research. But I'd like to know how practically this worked, how this worked in practice. Can you provide an example of a source where a source claimed something but you were able to use triangulation to contextualize or get behind the claims to come to a more sophisticated understanding? Or can you think of an example where triangulation worked in practice to help you ascertain the truthfulness of the claims being made?
Yeah. Thank you for this highly esteemed opponent for this really interesting question. Yes, interviews, and obviously I cannot really avoid biases in these interviews. One significant case would be like when I first interviewed interviewees and get the information that they feel like sometimes they are harassed by a lot of government agencies, like especially the tax department. I was actually buying their discourse because it seems like in a lot of literature they also said that corruption happened in the Kenya political economy that causes a lot of attention. But in the process of analysis, then thanks to my supervisors, I can have like deeper reflections about what kind of harassment and is it really a harassment? And that's the exact moment that I can connect this point to other comments they made. Like they still feel like they're not very familiar with the context. Sometimes they always feel like they are outsider of the whole system. And making this connection makes it like to triangulate the 2 points together is to set their feeling of the harassment is a combined feelings that they are not very familiar with the system. And sometimes there involves some misconduct of government stuff that they encountered. So that's kind of would be the case that to triangulate different perspectives to know that what they're saying is not really what they're saying, there's always behind. But of course, there's always hidden stories that they cannot reveal with me. And I think that's really requires me to embed myself more into the context, to know the context, to know that, well, probably at this place, they have a hidden story that's worth me to look at. But that's kind of need to grow with my knowledge and also my fieldwork experience. And unfortunately, this is actually my first proper fieldwork in Kenya. So there's a lot of biases that I cannot tell. And yes, I need to acknowledge that. But thank you for this question.
Thank you.
Okay, looking at the clock, we still have the opportunity for Professor Mazzucato to ask the question. You probably won't be able to answer it.
So I'll be very, very quick. Dear candidate, so you explained that theories on Chinese state and business relations have suffered from methodological nationalism, and that is why you take a transnational perspective. And I would like to ask you, zoom to the end of my question, if you could redo this study, what other, because it seems like you really look at China and Kenyan actors, what other actors would you include to get a better understanding of your research question?
Well, if I can redo this, I think the most, the one I want to pursue more would be those international financial institutions like the African Development Bank. They are very influential and they create disciplines for Chinese business operations. However, in a lot of cases, my informants can only reveal that, well, they are very powerful, they are influential, but in what sense, like what kind of nuances in this in their influence is something still missing. So in my future research, if possible, I want to pursue like what kind of African Development Corporation, African Development Bank, or even World Bank, the IFC, the International Financial Corporation, create structures for a lot of Chinese businesses, because they not only create opportunities, but they also have a lot of financial resources, like in a business sense, that could be useful and already put into use for a lot of Chinese firms to develop their business there. So.
Okay. Well, can I?
Yes, please.
Yes, because this has never happened before. I think the padel is late.
1 minute.
1 minute late. So, okay, so you've mentioned mainly international organizations. What about other types of actors? Maybe other state actors or other?
Oh, actually, it's not state actors I want to pursue more. It's like community actors, because they are very diverse and very complicated to unfold. So.
Passed. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Everybody did extremely well. And Yabo Wu, the time appointed for defending your thesis has now passed. The degree committee will now discuss the quality of your book, the quality of your thesis, and of your defense today. I request that you and your company leave this room. And after our deliberation, the beadle will come and collect you to return to this room.
All right, please.
your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Adam Dixon is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
All right, please.
First you have to read.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law, and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Yabo Wu, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university. Woo!
Please be seated.
No, okay. I'll stand next to you. Okay. Ready?
Yes.
Distinguished colleagues, esteemed committee members, dear guests, and most importantly, our newly minted Dr. Wu. It is a great honor and privilege to stand before you today to deliver this laudatio, celebrating the scholarly achievement we have just witnessed. Today marks not only the culmination of years of rigorous research, intellectual perseverance, and unwavering dedication, but also the contribution of a significant piece of scholarship to our understanding of global economic relations, specifically the intricate and evolving interactions between China and Africa. Dr. Wu's dissertation is a welcome addition to scholarship that engages with one of the most pressing and complex issues in contemporary global political economy, the role of the Chinese state and firms in Africa, with a particular focus on Kenya. It challenges prevailing narratives and enriches the academic discourse by providing a nuanced, empirically grounded analysis that moves beyond the simplified dichotomies. Instead of accepting the widely held notion that Chinese firms operate as mere extensions of state power, Dr. Wu unveils a much more dynamic and interactive reality. Through extensive fieldwork, insightful case studies, and meticulous analysis, this thesis reveals a landscape of negotiation, adaptation, and contestation. One where the Chinese state, its firms, and Kenyan stakeholders engage in a complex dance of influence, interests, and mutual adjustments. This work makes three major contributions that significantly advance our understanding of Chinese development cooperation in Africa. First, it challenges the assumption of a monolithic Chinese state that exercises unilateral control over its businesses. Instead, it presents a compelling argument for the state's malleability, demonstrating how it adapts to constraints and opportunities within the Kenyan political and economic context. Second, it highlights the agency of Chinese firms, both state-owned and private, showing how they navigate their commercial imperatives while simultaneously engaging in contested collaborations with Chinese and Kenyan state actors. And third, it critically impacts the process of constructing the political narrative of Chinese development cooperation, bridging polarized perspectives that either frame China as a neo-colonial force or as an unambiguous development partner. The substance of this work is evident not only in its theoretical contributions, but also in its methodological attention. Conducting extensive fieldwork in Kenya, engaging with diverse stakeholders from infrastructure, trade, and manufacturing sectors, as well as government and media, is no small feat. This depth of empirical engagement has allowed Dr. Wu to provide a detailed, contextually informed, and analytically robust study on Chinese economic actors in Kenya that will undoubtedly serve as a reference for scholars and policymakers alike. Beyond the academic contributions, this dissertation is a testament to the intellectual curiosity, perseverance, and scholarly integrity of Dr. Wu. Navigating the complexities of transnational economic engagements, dissecting political narratives, and making sense of multifaceted relationships requires not only sharp analytical skills, but also resilience and dedication. Qualities that Dr. Wu has demonstrated in abundance throughout this journey. Dr. Wu, today we celebrate not just the completion of your doctoral journey, but the impact of your work. Your research has shed new light on a crucial area of study, and its implications will resonate beyond academia, informing policymakers, businesses, and international stakeholders engaged in China-Africa relations. We have no doubt that this is just the beginning of an illustrious career, and we look forward to seeing how your insights and expertise continue to shape the field in the years to come, not simply in China, but also in Africa, Europe, and beyond. On behalf of Dr. McCory and the entire committee and all present here today, I extend my warmest congratulations to you, Dr. Wu. May your future endeavors be as enlightening and impactful as the work you have presented today. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very nice laudatio, and I will now close this ceremony. And dear Dr. Wu, we have to practice this, sounds great. Also on behalf of Maastricht University, I really congratulate you with the degree you have acquired today, with the defense you just did today, and we will enjoy the day, we will celebrate the day, and in order to honor this, we will first of all take a picture on the stairs together with your mother who came all the way from China, so that's also fantastic, and then we will celebrate at the Riverside Lounge by the River Maas. So congratulations and enjoy.
Thank you.